She thought she knew every inch of his life, until she found a locked wall inside his office. Behind it, a room that wasn't meant to exist. What she uncovered shattered her and set her free. Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway of her husband's office, key card in hand, feeling like an intruder in her own home. The room smelled of leather and bergamot cologne, Daniel's scent, concentrated and deliberate. In 12 years of marriage, she'd entered this space, maybe a dozen times. It was his. The boundary had never been spoken, just understood. Tax documents, he'd said that morning, distracted, already halfway out the door. Blue folder. Second drawer on the right. I need them tonight. She'd nodded, watched him leave, and stood holding her coffee until it went cold. Now, late afternoon light slanted through the plantation shutters, casting bars of gold across the mahogany desk. Everything in the office was precisely arranged. Fountain pens aligned parallel to the desk edge. Monitor angled exactly perpendicular. A single framed photograph of their wedding, 12 years compressed into 4 by 6 inches. Sarah looked younger in that photo, lighter somehow. She opened the second drawer, manila folders, alphabetized. She found the blue one wedged behind the others and pulled. It caught on something. She tugged harder. An envelope slipped free and fell behind the filing cabinet. Sarah knelt, reaching into the narrow gap. Her fingers brushed something unexpected. Not the envelope, but the wall itself. She knocked. The sound came back hollow, empty. She pulled her hand back, frowning. She knocked again, louder, definitely hollow. But the exterior wall of the Victorian ran continuous along this side of the house. There shouldn't be emptiness here. There should be insulation, studs, substance. Sarah stood, stepping back to examine the room with new attention. The office was generous, maybe 15 feet wide, but the bedroom next door, which shared this wall, was at least 20. She'd never noticed the discrepancy. Why would she? You don't measure rooms you trust. She opened the desk drawer again, found the envelope, and left the office. Closed the door. Locked it with the key card Daniel had given her years ago for emergencies. She wondered, walking down the hall, when she'd started thinking of his space as requiring emergency access. That evening, Daniel came home at 7:30. Later than he'd said, earlier than usual. Sarah had set the table. Pasta, salad, wine. He kissed her forehead in passing, the gesture automatic as flipping a light switch. "Did you find the folder?" he asked, sitting down, already reaching for his phone. "Yes." Sarah watched his face as she spoke. "I was in your office. First time in a while, actually. It's very organized." His fork paused, just for a second, barely perceptible, before continuing to his mouth. "You know me. Everything in its place. Do you ever feel like it's too small? The office, mean." He looked up then, his eyes finding hers with the precise attention he gave problems requiring solutions. "Too small how?" "I don't know. Just a feeling." She smiled, kept her voice light. "Maybe I'm just used to my studio, all that open space." Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly. He returned to his pasta. "You're an artist. You need room to make a mess. I need containment." He said it like a joke. She laughed appropriately. He asked if she'd found everything okay. She said yes. He relaxed further. She didn't mention the wall, didn't mention the hollow sound that had followed her out of his office like an echo of something she couldn't name. That night Sarah lay awake beside her husband. His breathing was even, untroubled. She studied his profile in the darkness, the face she'd woken up beside for 12 years. She thought about the small distances that had accumulated between them, the late nights he blamed on the firm, the laptop he password protected for client confidentiality. The way he startled when she entered rooms, as if she'd interrupted something. She'd told herself she was paranoid, that her mother's suspicious nature had infected her, that happy marriages required trust, and trust meant not measuring the spaces between what you were told and what you observed. But the wall was real. The hollow sound was real. The math of the missing feet didn't require paranoia to solve. Sarah slipped out of bed at dawn, after Daniel left for his morning run. She returned to the office with a tape measure from the garage. She measured the interior wall, 15 feet, 3 inches. She went outside in her robe and slippers, wet grass soaking through to her skin, and measured the exterior, 23 feet, 2 inches, 8 feet unaccounted for, hidden behind a wall that shouldn't exist. Sarah stood in the morning cold, tape measure hanging loose in her hand, and thought about the renovations 3 years ago. Daniel had insisted on handling the contractor himself. "I'm the architect," he'd said. "Let me design our space." She'd been grateful. She'd trusted his vision. She'd been working 60-hour weeks at the museum and appreciated having one less thing to manage. She went back inside, into the office. She pressed her ear against the wall where it sounded most hollow, and there, so faint she might have imagined it, she heard something. Not silence. A hum, mechanical, steady, like something electronic running continuously behind walls that weren't supposed to exist. Sarah's hand stayed pressed against the surface, feeling the faint vibration beneath painted drywall. She thought about the photograph on Daniel's desk, her younger face, smiling at the camera, at the man beside her, at the future she thought they were building. She pulled her hand away. The vibration continued without her. Whatever was behind that wall had been humming all along. She'd just never been quiet enough to hear it. Sarah remembered the blueprints. Daniel had proposed with them. Not a ring, but rolled architectural drawings tied with blue ribbon. They'd been dating 8 months. She was 26, finishing her master's thesis on Renaissance restoration techniques. He was 28, a junior architect with careful hands and careful words. "I want to build something with you," he'd said, unrolling the papers across her tiny apartment floor. Floor plans for a Victorian house, elevations showing wraparound porches, details of crown molding and original hardwood. "We'll restore it together. Your eye for history, my structural knowledge. We'll make something beautiful." She'd said yes before he'd even asked the question. 14 years later, Sarah sat at their kitchen table with the shared laptop open, trying to remember when she'd stopped being consulted about the beautiful thing they were building. The password had been changed. She typed the old one, their anniversary, and got an error message. She tried her birthday, his birthday, the address of the Victorian. All rejected. She felt ridiculous, paranoid. She almost closed the laptop. But the mechanical hum from the office upstairs, she could hear it even now, faint through the ceiling, wouldn't let her stop. She found an old tablet in the junk drawer, one they'd shared before Daniel upgraded to his work devices. It still had their joint calendar synced. She scrolled through the past month. Blue blocks marked late meeting appeared 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, always 8 p.m. or later. Sarah opened Daniel's firm's website on her phone. The contact page listed office hours, Monday, Friday, 8 a.m., 6 p.m. She stared at the discrepancy, tried to construct explanations, client dinners, site visits. Maybe the calendar was wrong. Maybe she'd misunderstood. But the blue blocks stretched back months. A pattern, not an exception. Sarah's hands felt cold. She made herself keep searching. She found the firm's directory, clicked on Daniel's name. His bio listed his specialties: residential design, historic preservation, private commissions. His photo showed him smiling in front of a blueprint, every hair in place. She called the main number. A receptionist answered, bright and professional. "Hi, I'm calling to schedule a consultation with Daniel Mitchell." Sarah kept her voice light, unfamiliar. "I was referred by a friend." "Wonderful. Mr. Mitchell is excellent. Let me check his availability." Keys clicked. He typically leaves the main office by 5:30, but he does see private clients at the annex in the evenings. "Would that work for you?" Sarah's throat tightened. "The annex?" "Yes, for his private practice. It's where he meets clients who prefer more discretion." A pause. "I'm sorry, I assumed you were a referral. We don't typically give out that address directly." "Oh, of course. My friend must have forgotten to mention it. Could you remind me where it's located?" The receptionist's tone shifted cooler. "I'll have Mr. Mitchell contact you directly to arrange a meeting. May I have your name and number?" Sarah ended the call. She sat in the kitchen, the afternoon light fading around her, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart. Something deeper. The foundation of what she'd built her understanding on. That evening, Daniel came home at 9:47 p.m. Sarah had been watching the clock. She'd made dinner hours ago, then put it away uneaten. She sat in the living room with a book she wasn't reading, waiting. His key turned in the lock. He came in carrying his leather messenger bag, his face showing the careful neutrality she'd stopped noticing years ago. He kissed her forehead in passing, the gesture automatic, perfunctory, like checking a box on a list. She smelled it then. Perfume. Faint but unmistakable. Floral, expensive. Not hers. She wore nothing with scent. Allergies, she'd told him years ago. He'd seemed relieved. "Long day?" she asked. "Difficult client." He set his bag by the stairs. Contract negotiations went late. Then traffic was a nightmare. She watched his hands as he spoke, architect's hands, precise and controlled. Hands that had shown her blueprints and promised to build something beautiful. Hands that had built a hidden room in their house without telling her. What kind of project? Sarah kept her voice casual. Residential renovation. Challenging space constraints. He moved toward the kitchen. "Have you eaten?" "Hours ago." She stood, following him. "Daniel, do you ever meet clients at an annex?" His back was to her, opening the refrigerator. His shoulders tensed, just slightly, just for a moment. "Sometimes. Why?" "Just curious. I didn't know the firm had one." "It's not the firm's. It's mine." He pulled out leftover pasta, his movements deliberate. "For private commissions. Clients who want more discretion." "Where is it?" "Downtown." He opened a drawer, retrieved a fork. "Why all the questions?" "I'm your wife. I'm interested in your work." He turned then, meeting her eyes with the precise attention he gave structural problems. "Are you?" The question hung between them. Sarah realized she'd stopped asking about his work years ago, stopped expecting real answers, stopped expecting to be included in the beautiful thing they were supposedly building together. "Yes," she said quietly. "I am." He studied her face a moment longer, then turned back to his food. "It's boring, Sarah. Contracts and code compliance. You'd hate it." That night she lay beside him, listening to his breathing even out into sleep. She waited an hour, then another. At 2 a.m. she slipped out of bed and went to the bathroom. She locked the door and stared at her reflection. 40 years old, 2 miscarriages, no children. 12 years of marriage condensed into this moment, not knowing whether to confront or investigate, whether ignorance was protection or prison. She touched her own face. When did she become someone who accepted surface answers? Who stopped measuring the space between what she was told and what she observed? Sarah turned off the light and stood in the darkness, listening. The house settled around her. And beneath everything, so faint she might have imagined it, she heard the mechanical hum from Daniel's office. Still running, still hiding something behind walls that shouldn't exist. She made a decision. Tomorrow, while he was at work, she would go back into that office. And this time, she wouldn't stop at measuring. This time, she would find out what he'd built in the 8 feet of space that didn't exist on any blueprint she'd ever been shown. Sarah found the locksmith on her phone at 3 a.m. Couldn't sleep, scrolling through emergency services. Rita's Locks and Keys, 24-hour service. 5-star reviews. Locked out of a storage space in my own home, Sarah told the voice on the other end. Can someone come today? Rita arrived at 9 after Daniel left for work. She was a woman in her 50s with calloused hands and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain. She listened to Sarah's explanation. Locked storage, lost key, without visible judgment. Show me, Rita said. In the office, Sarah pointed to the wall. Rita set down her toolbox and ran her palm along the painted surface, the way Sarah had days ago. She knocked, listened, knocked again. This is new construction, Rita said. 3, maybe 4 years old. Built to code but designed to look original. She traced the seam with her finger, barely visible where paint met paint. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Sarah's throat was tight. Can you open it? Rita looked at her then, really looked. You sure you want me to? Sarah thought about the blueprints Daniel had proposed with, the beautiful thing they were supposed to build together, the mechanical hum she'd been hearing for days, maybe years, without knowing she was hearing it. Yes. Rita worked methodically. She used a utility knife to score along the seam, peeling back paint to reveal the outline of a door. No handle, no obvious lock. Rita ran a detector along the frame, searching for metal. Found it. A combination lock, recessed and hidden behind a false panel. Fancy, Rita murmured. She pulled tools from her kit, a stethoscope, slim picks, something electronic Sarah didn't recognize. This'll take a minute. Sarah stood back, watching Rita work. 20 minutes passed. The house was silent except for the soft clicks of metal on metal. Rita's breathing, Sarah's heartbeat loud in her own ears. Then, a heavier click, mechanical, final. There, Rita said. She looked at Sarah. You want me to open it, or you want to? Sarah's hands were shaking. She stepped forward, pressed against the door. It swung inward on silent hinges. Motion-activated track lighting flickered on, flooding a space that shouldn't exist. 8 feet deep, 10 feet wide. A room carved out of architecture Sarah thought she knew. The air that rushed out was cool, climate-controlled. It smelled like electronics and dust and something else. Perfume, faint and layered, like multiple scents mixed over time. Sarah stepped inside. A desk, laptop closed, filing cabinets, 3 of them, and covering the far wall, photographs, dozens of them. Women's faces, printed and pinned in neat rows. Some were professional headshots, some candid. Women laughing, unaware they were being documented. Sarah recognized a few from Daniel's firm. Others were strangers. Below each photograph, handwritten dates in Daniel's precise architectural script. And notes. Brief, clinical. Initial contact, March 12th, 2022. Response, positive. Follow-up scheduled. Meeting 4, resistance increasing. Adjust approach. Project complete. August 30th, 2023. Sarah's legs stopped working. She sat down hard on the floor, her back against the desk. Rita hovered in the doorway, uncertain. You want me to call someone? Rita asked. Sarah shook her head. She couldn't speak. Rita stayed another moment, then quietly stepped back into the office. Sarah heard her packing up tools. The front door opened and closed. She was alone. Sarah pulled herself up using the desk edge. The laptop sat there, closed, waiting. She opened it. No password. The screen glowed to life, organized desktop folders labeled with names. Women's names. Jennifer, Melissa, Catherine, Amanda. She clicked on Jennifer. Inside, financial records, restaurant receipts, hotel bookings, emails, saved and cataloged. Photographs, the woman from the wall, but more of them. Candid shots taken from distance, through windows and parking lots. Years of documentation. Sarah opened another folder, then another. Not affairs. Something else. Something systematic. Each woman tracked like a project through phases. Approach, engagement, maintenance, completion. She found the filing cabinets unlocked. Inside, printed correspondence, contracts, legal documents, a ledger, tracking hours like billable time. Notes in Daniel's handwriting, analyzing responses, adjusting strategies. Subject responds better to validation than direct instruction. Increased frequency of casual contact. Subject. The word made Sarah's stomach turn. She opened the last drawer, found a folder labeled simply ACE. Her hands went numb. She lifted it out, opened it. Inside, photographs of herself. Some she remembered, early in their relationship, before they were engaged. Others she'd never seen, taken without her knowledge. Her at the museum where she used to work. Her at the coffee shop she'd stopped going to years ago because Daniel said the traffic getting there stressed her out. And notes, pages of them, dated from their first meeting 14 years ago. Initial assessment. Insecure about career trajectory, seeking validation. Father absent, mother critical. Strong need for approval from authority figures. 3 months. Responds well to architectural metaphors. Building, foundation, structure. Frame relationship as collaborative project to increase investment. 6 months. Career dissatisfaction can be leveraged. Suggest leaving museum position. Frame as stress reduction. Position self as supportive. 1 year. Eager to please. Conflict averse. Malleable. Sarah read the word 3 times. Malleable. Like clay. Like material. Like something to be shaped. She kept reading. Couldn't stop. The notes documented everything. Her miscarriages. Emotional vulnerability increased. Dependency heightened. Her abandoned art career, reduction in external validation sources, successful. Her gradual isolation from friends, boundary establishment complete. Every choice she thought she'd made, every decision she'd believed was hers, documented, planned, executed. At the bottom of the folder, a document titled Case Study. Long-term relationship architecture. 12 pages analyzing their marriage as a design project. Her as the subject. Him as the architect. The house as the structure. Control as the blueprint. Sarah sat on the floor of the hidden room. This space her husband had built specifically to hide the truth about who he was and what he'd been doing, and felt something inside her crack. Not her heart. Something deeper. The foundation she'd built her entire adult life on. The walls around her were painted pale blue, neutral, calm, like a doctor's office. The photographs stared down at her, all those women's faces. She wondered how many of them knew they'd been subjects. How many had felt this same sick realization, that their choices hadn't been choices at all. The laptop screen had gone dark. Sarah reached up, touched the trackpad. It glowed again. She clicked on another folder. More names. More women. More documentation of manipulation. So precise it looked like love. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there in the climate-controlled silence, surrounded by evidence that her marriage was architecture, and she'd been living inside walls she'd never been meant to see. Outside, through the false wall, Through the office door, she could hear the house settling. Normal sounds. A home where someone had built a hidden room to document how effectively he could control the people who trusted him. Sarah looked at the photograph of herself pinned to the wall, younger, smiling, unaware, and realized she didn't recognize that woman anymore. Maybe she never had. Sarah didn't leave the hidden room. She couldn't. The world outside felt impossible. The kitchen where she'd made dinner, the bedroom where she'd slept beside him, the life she'd believed was hers. All of it architecture. All of it designed. She read every file. Hours passed, though she lost track of time. The mechanical hum she'd been hearing for days. It was the climate control system keeping this room's contents preserved, keeping the evidence of what he'd done to her, to all of them, pristine. She found a document titled Architectural Principles of Relationship, Design, 17 pages. Daniel had written it like a technical manual, complete with diagrams. Foundation: establish dependency through gradual isolation and controlled vulnerability. Framework: manage information flow, create asymmetric knowledge. Facade: maintain appearance of partnership while retaining decision authority. Sarah recognized every technique, saw them laid out like blueprints. Every conversation, every suggestion, every moment she'd thought was care, it was construction. He'd built her like a room, walls she couldn't see, a ceiling low enough that she'd learned to make herself smaller without noticing. She remembered him suggesting she leave the museum. "You're so stressed," he'd said, his hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. "I hate seeing you like this. You deserve better." She'd loved that job, the restoration work, the careful piecing together of broken things. But he'd been right, hadn't he? She had been stressed. She'd quit 3 months later, relieved to have his support. Except she hadn't been stressed. She'd been excited, challenged, alive. Sarah kept reading, found notes about their finances. He'd taken over the accounts because you're too emotional about money. She had a degree in economics. She'd managed a department budget at the museum. But he'd said it so kindly, framed it as protection, and she'd believed the problem was hers. The friends who'd stopped calling, she'd thought she'd drifted from them naturally. But there were notes. Reduce external validation sources. Suggest schedule conflicts. Position myself as primary social outlet. He'd even chosen her therapist. "I found someone really good, very reasonable." The therapist who'd helped her work through her reluctance to fully trust Daniel, who'd called it abandonment issues from her father leaving, who'd been paid, she now saw in the files, directly by Daniel through his firm's discretionary account. Sarah's hands were shaking. She kept reading. Found emails between Daniel and someone named Marcus. Years of correspondence. They discussed the women like experiments, data points. Marcus wrote, "How's the wife project going?" Daniel's response, "S is stable, low flight risk. The miscarriages actually helped. Increased dependency, reduced external focus. Considering long-term viability for case study documentation." The laptop slipped from Sarah's hands. It hit the floor, but didn't break. She stared at the screen, at those words. The miscarriages actually helped. She remembered the first one. 12 weeks. She'd been devastated. Daniel had held her while she cried, stroked her hair, told her they'd try again. She'd thought his steadiness was strength, thought his calm was what she needed. He'd been taking notes. Sarah stood too fast. The room tilted. She stumbled out of the hidden room, through the office, down the hall to the master bathroom. She barely made it to the toilet before she vomited, her body rejecting what her mind had learned. Afterward, she washed her face with cold water and looked up at the mirror. Really looked. The woman staring back was a stranger. When had Sarah stopped recognizing herself? Her hair was shoulder length, the exact length Daniel had suggested 3 years ago. "It frames your face better," he'd said. She'd kept it that way ever since. Her clothes were muted colors, grays, beiges, soft blues. "You look elegant in neutrals," he told her. Her bright colors had gradually disappeared from the closet. Even her posture. She stood with her shoulders curved slightly inward, making herself smaller, taking up less space. When had that started? Sarah thought about her art history degree, the career she'd abandoned, the paintings she used to make in college, bold, messy, full of color. Daniel had looked at them once and said, "Interesting, very expressive." She'd stopped painting shortly after. The friends who'd drifted away were the ones who'd questioned him, who'd asked why she'd quit the museum, why they never saw her alone anymore. Malleable, the word echoed. She'd read it in his notes about her. A material quality, something to be shaped, bent, formed. Sarah walked back to the hidden room. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, but they moved. She pulled her phone from her pocket, somehow still charged, though she had no memory of when she'd last plugged it in. She began photographing everything, every document, every photograph on the wall, every email, every note in Daniel's precise handwriting. She was methodical, precise. She didn't cry. Something had shifted inside her. The crack in the wall had become a crack in her understanding of reality. And through that crack, light was getting in. She photographed the manifesto, the case studies, the folder labeled S with its devastating assessment. Insecure about career, eager to please, malleable. She photographed the email about her miscarriages, about her being low flight risk, about her therapist being compromised. The sun was rising by the time she finished. A gray light filtered through the office window, reaching into the hidden room. Sarah stood among the photographs of all those women's faces, subjects he'd called them, and felt something strange settling over her. Not grief anymore, not even anger yet. Something colder, clearer. For 12 years, she'd lived inside walls she couldn't see. She'd made choices that weren't choices. She'd become someone she didn't recognize because recognition would have meant acknowledging she'd been erased. But now she could see the walls, see the architecture of her cage, and seeing them meant they'd already started to crumble. Sarah saved the last photograph, the document titled Case Study, Long-Term Relationship Architecture, and closed the camera app. Outside, she could hear birds beginning their morning songs. Normal sounds, a world that had kept turning while she discovered hers had been built on lies. She looked once more at the photograph of herself on the wall, younger, smiling, unaware that the man she loved was documenting how effectively he could erase her. That woman was gone. Sarah couldn't bring her back even if she wanted to. But maybe, standing here in the ruins of her marriage, surrounded by evidence of systematic manipulation, maybe that woman was never real to begin with. Maybe she'd always been architecture, a design, a project. The question wasn't who she'd been. The question was who she'd choose to become, now that the walls were visible. Sarah turned off the lights in the hidden room and closed the door, left it unlocked. She walked down the hall to the bedroom she'd shared with Daniel for 12 years and pulled a suitcase from the closet. She didn't know yet where she was going, only that she couldn't stay inside these walls another night. Sarah didn't leave. She unpacked the suitcase and waited. She sat in the hidden room, surrounded by evidence of what her husband had done. The photographs stared down at her. All those women's faces, including her own. She'd spent hours in this space now, long enough that the mechanical hum had become almost comforting, a constant. the only honest sound in a house built on lies. She heard Daniel's car at 9:30 p.m. Right on schedule. The garage door opening, closing. His footsteps through the kitchen, the living room. He called her name. Once, twice. She didn't answer. She listened to him climb the stairs, moving through rooms, the bedroom, the bathroom, each door opening, closing, searching. Finally, his footsteps stopped outside the office. The door opened. Silence. Then his voice, tight. "Sarah?" She didn't respond. She heard him step into the office, heard the exact moment he saw the hole in the wall, the way his breathing changed. Stopped. Started again. For a long moment, nothing. Then Daniel appeared in the doorway of the hidden room. His tie was loosened, his jacket over one arm. He looked at her, sitting on the floor. Then at the open laptop, the filing cabinets with drawers pulled out, the photographs on the wall. His face was carefully neutral. Architect's face. Everything measured. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I can explain." Just a statement of fact. She'd violated the architecture of their arrangement. Sarah gestured to the laptop, to the photographs, to the years of documentation surrounding them. How long? Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Calm, almost curious. Daniel stepped into the room, set his jacket on his desk chair. The desk in his hidden room, the room he'd built specifically to document his systematic manipulation of human beings. "From the beginning," he said. Sarah had expected this answer. Still, hearing it felt like falling through ice. 14 years, every moment, every conversation, every choice she'd thought was hers. Daniel sat down at his desk, as comfortable here as he'd always been in his regular office. More comfortable, maybe. This was his real workspace, where he did his real work. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice taking on the measured tone he used for difficult clients. "I've always been fascinated by control, by the architecture of influence, how spaces, physical and emotional, shape behavior. Marriage is the ultimate design challenge, creating a structure where someone chooses to stay within walls they don't know exist." Sarah stared at him. He was explaining, like this was a project review, like she was a colleague he was bringing up to speed. "The key," he continued, "is making the subject believe they're making their own choices. Give them the illusion of agency while controlling the parameters of every decision. It's elegant, really. Clean, like good architecture, invisible until you look for it." "The subject," Sarah repeated. "You mean me. You, the others." He gestured to the photographs. "Most didn't work out. They left or they noticed the inconsistencies. Pattern recognition is the enemy of control. But you—" He looked at her with something that might have been affection in another person. "You were perfect. You wanted to believe. That's the foundation of any successful design. The participant's investment in the structure's stability." Sarah felt something break inside her. Not her heart. She'd cried that out hours ago. Something deeper. The bedrock of her understanding of love, partnership, reality itself. "The miscarriages," she said. "You called them helpful." "I know that sounds harsh." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "But objectively, they did increase your emotional dependency, reduced your external focus, made the structure more stable." He paused. "You were happy, Sarah. I made you happy. That counts for something." She looked at this man, this stranger she'd shared a bed with for 12 years, and realized he genuinely believed this. He wasn't lying or performing. This was his truth. He'd studied manipulation the way other people studied music or medicine, applied it systematically, documented it professionally, and he thought the results justified the methodology. You don't understand what you did, Sarah said quietly. I understand perfectly. I created an optimal environment for partnership. I eliminated variables that might destabilize the relationship. You erased me? Daniel frowned. Yeah, I optimized you. The word hung between them. Optimized. Like she was software. Like personhood was a design flaw that needed correcting. Sarah stood. Her legs were steadier than they'd been in hours. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Not love. Not even hatred. Just absolute, crystalline clarity about who he was and what he'd done. Sometimes the worst betrayals are the ones that show you who you've become, the ones that strip away every comfortable lie until you're standing in the ruins of what you thought was your life, forced to see the architecture of your own cage. If this story has made you question the walls in your own life, the ones you built and the ones built around you, share it with someone who needs permission to start breaking through. I'm leaving, Sarah said. Daniel's expression shifted, the first genuine surprise she'd seen. Where would you go? I don't know yet. Sarah. His voice took on a patient tone, the one he used when explaining why her ideas wouldn't work. Be realistic. You need this house. You need the financial stability. You need you, she finished. I need you. That's what you're going to say. Yes. He stood moving toward her with his hands open, architect's hands, precise and controlled. We can work through this. You're upset, which is understandable, but we can redesign this. Rebuild. I can adjust the parameters. Sarah saw it then, his genuine confusion. He'd designed her so carefully, so completely, that he couldn't conceive she'd choose demolition over renovation. In his mind, she was still a project, still fixable. That's the problem, Daniel. She stepped back from his reaching hands. You made me need you. You built that need into me, piece by piece, year by year. Every suggestion, every caring intervention, every time you took over something I could do myself, you were building dependency, architecture, like you said. I was building partnership. You were building a cage. Sarah's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. But I can see the walls now, and I'm going to spend however long it takes unmaking what you made. I'm going to tear down every piece of architecture you built inside me until I can figure out who I was before you started designing me. She walked toward the door. Daniel moved to block her, then stopped, some instinct maybe, telling him that touching her now would shatter whatever remained of his control. You won't make it without me, he said. Not a threat. A statement of architectural fact. I know you, Sarah. Every weakness, every fear. I built your entire support structure. Where will you go? Who will you turn to? I removed every external dependency years ago. Sarah paused in the doorway, looked back at the hidden room, this space he'd built to document his systematic erasure of her personhood, at the photographs of all those women, at Daniel standing among his filing cabinets, his documentation, his proof of how successfully he'd manipulated people who'd trusted him. You're right, she said. You did remove every external dependency. You made sure I needed only you, that I had nowhere else to turn. She met his eyes. But you made one architectural error, Daniel. You taught me I can live in a space I can't see the walls of, that I can survive in structures built without my knowledge or consent. She smiled. Not warmth, just recognition. If I can survive your design, I can survive its demolition. She walked out of the hidden room, down the hall, down the stairs, out the front door into the night air. Behind her, she heard Daniel call her name. Once. Then silence. Sarah stood on the front lawn of the Victorian house they were supposed to have restored together. The house she'd thought was theirs but had really always been his. Another structure designed to contain her. She pulled out her phone, opened her contacts, found her sister Claire's number. Claire, who she stopped calling years ago because Daniel always said family gatherings stressed her out. She hit dial. Sarah? Claire's voice was surprised, worried. Is everything okay? No, Sarah said. And for the first time in 12 years, telling the truth felt like breathing. Claire opened her door at midnight, wearing flannel pajamas and reading glasses, her phone already in her hand from Sarah's call. She took one look at Sarah's face and pulled her inside without questions. I need... Sarah started, then stopped. She didn't know what she needed, didn't have words for what had happened. Claire guided her to the kitchen table, poured water into a glass, sat down across from her. Tell me. Sarah tried, her mouth open, but no sound came out. So she pulled out her phone instead, opened the photos she'd taken, handed it across the table. Claire scrolled in silence. The photographs of women on the wall, Daniel's manifesto, the notes about Sarah herself, malleable, low flight risk, the miscarriages actually helped. Claire set the phone down carefully, like it might break. How long have you known? Since this morning, yesterday morning. Time felt strange. I found a hidden room, in his office, behind a wall. Jesus Christ. Claire stood, paced to the window, came back. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted. Not sister now, but attorney. We need to get you a restraining order, tonight. It's midnight. Emergency filing. This is documented surveillance, psychological manipulation, financial control. Claire was already pulling out her laptop. Sarah, this is abuse. Do you understand that? What he did is abuse. Sarah stared at the water glass. The word felt too big and too small at once. Abuse. She thought of the women she'd seen in support groups on TV, with bruises, with broken bones. She had no bruises. Daniel had never raised his hand to her. He never hit me, Sarah said. Abuse isn't just physical. Claire's voice was gentle but firm. He isolated you from friends and family, controlled your career decisions, managed your finances without your consent, documented your behavior without your knowledge. That's coercive control. That's abuse. They spent the next 4 hours documenting everything. Claire asked questions in her attorney voice, taking notes. Did he ever physically prevent you from leaving? Control your access to bank accounts? Monitor your communications? Sarah answered yes to things she'd never thought to question. The joint account only he had the password to. The way he'd helped by taking over all their finances. The suggestion that she didn't need her own credit card because they had the shared one. The phone plan under his name. The way he'd slowly, carefully removed every external support until he was the only structure holding her up. By the time the sun rose, Sarah hadn't slept. Claire had made 17 calls, to judges, to a forensic accountant who owed her a favor, to a therapist who specialized in coercive control, to a locksmith. The house, Claire said, looking up from her notepad. Whose name is it in? Mine. My grandmother left it to me before Daniel and I got married. The memory felt distant, like someone else's life. Her grandmother, who'd loved the Victorian house, who'd insisted Sarah keep it in her name alone. She didn't trust him, Sarah said suddenly. She told me that once. I thought she was being paranoid. Claire's expression softened. She was protecting you. Daniel called 17 times that morning. Sarah watched the phone light up, again and again, his name appearing on the screen like an accusation. She didn't answer. Claire drafted a cease and desist letter, while Sarah sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee she couldn't taste, and by noon, they'd filed for an emergency restraining order. The judge reviewed Sarah's documentation, the photographs, the manifesto, the emails discussing her miscarriages as architectural opportunities, and granted it immediately. Your husband, the judge had said, looking at Sarah over her glasses, is a danger to you. Not physically, perhaps. But what he did was methodical, psychological torture. You did the right thing coming forward. They returned to the Victorian with a police escort. Daniel was at work. Claire had called his office to confirm. The officer waited by the door while Sarah and Claire moved through the house, boxing up Daniel's belongings. Claire insisted they document everything. Photograph each room before they touched it. Create a record. Sarah moved through the space like a ghost, seeing it with new eyes, the furniture he'd chosen, the colors he'd selected, the layout he'd designed. Even the house itself had been his architecture. When they reached the office, Sarah stopped at the doorway. The hidden room gaped open, the false wall she'd cut through with Rita's help standing as evidence of what he'd concealed. We should leave this intact, Claire said. Evidence for the divorce proceedings. Sarah looked at the hidden room, this space Daniel had built specifically to document his erasure of her. The photographs still on the walls, the laptop still on the desk, the filing cabinets full of his systematic manipulations. She walked to Daniel's toolbox in the corner of the office, opened it, pulled out a hammer. Sarah! Sarah swung. The hammer hit the false wall between the office and the hidden room. Drywall crumbled, sending up clouds of white dust. She swung again. The impact jarred her arms, felt good, real. She swung again and again, demolishing the partition that had separated truth from lie. Claire stepped back, watching. Didn't try to stop her. Sarah worked methodically, tearing down the false wall section by section. The drywall came apart easily. Daniel had built it well, but not to withstand demolition from the inside. Dust filled the air, coating her clothes, her hair, her skin. She could taste it, proof that the walls were coming down. When she finished, she stood breathing hard in the rubble, where there had been 2 rooms, one visible, one hidden. Now there was just one large space. Sunlight streamed through the office window, flooding into the area that had been concealed. The photographs on the wall looked smaller now, less powerful. Just paper pinned to dry wall. It's just a room now, Sarah said, her voice hoarse from dust and exertion. Just a fucking room. The police officer cleared his throat from the doorway. Ma'am, we need to finish and leave before he gets home. They loaded Daniel's boxes into Claire's car. Sarah took one last look at the Victorian, the house her grandmother had left her, the house she'd thought would be her home. It looked different now, smaller, just a structure, just walls and windows and doors that opened and closed. She got in Claire's car. As they drove away, Sarah looked back once, saw the Victorian standing there, solid and real, and no longer holding any power over her. Where to? Claire asked. I don't know. Sarah rolled down the window, let fresh air hit her face, air that tasted like nothing but itself. Not Daniel's cologne, or the mechanical hum of hidden rooms, just air. Somewhere I can figure out who I am when I'm not being designed. Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. They drove in silence, leaving the Victorian and everything it contained behind them. Sarah watched the streets pass, the ordinary world continuing around them. People walking dogs, children playing in yards, life happening in spaces that weren't constructed to contain them. She pulled out her phone, looked at the photographs she'd taken of the other women in Daniel's files. Women with names, addresses, phone numbers, women who might not even know they'd been subjects, who might be living in invisible architectures of their own. She thought about calling them, warning them, but not today. Today she just needed to breathe air that didn't taste like lies. Claire's voice was soft. You okay? Sarah looked at her sister who'd believed her immediately, who'd moved into action without hesitation, who'd stood by while she demolished a wall with a hammer because sometimes destruction was the only path to truth. "No," Sarah said honestly, "but I will be." And for the first time in 12 years, she meant it. 3 months later, Sarah sat in Dr. Patel's office. A different therapist. One she'd chosen herself from a list Claire had given her. Not someone Daniel had found. Not someone he'd vetted or paid or positioned as part of her architecture. "How are you sleeping?" Dr. Patel asked. "Badly," Sarah said honestly, "but on my own terms." The restraining order had been granted. The divorce was proceeding. Someone, Sarah suspected Claire, though her sister denied it, had sent anonymous copies of Daniel's Architectural Principles of Relationship Design to his colleagues at the firm. He was on administrative leave, under investigation for ethics violations. Multiple former clients had come forward with complaints about boundary violations, inappropriate documentation, manipulation disguised as professional advice. Sarah felt no satisfaction hearing this, only exhaustion. She'd started teaching again, an adjunct position at the community college, art history survey course. It paid almost nothing, but standing in front of the students felt like stepping back into a version of herself she'd forgotten existed. One afternoon, discussing the restoration of damaged Renaissance frescoes, Sarah found herself crying. Not from sadness exactly, but from recognition. She was explaining how restorers had to accept that you couldn't make destroyed art whole again. You could stabilize what remained. You could build something new around the fragments. But restoration wasn't resurrection. Her students sat in uncomfortable silence. Sarah apologized, dismissed class early, and sat alone in the empty classroom, watching dust motes drift through afternoon light. You couldn't restore what was destroyed. You could only build something new from the fragments. She'd been sorting through boxes from the Victorian. 12 years of marriage compressed into cardboard, stored in Claire's garage. She found things she'd forgotten existed. Her own artwork from before Daniel. Paintings she'd abandoned when he'd looked at them and said they weren't quite right. She found journals where her handwriting gradually became smaller, more hesitant, taking up less space on the page. She found photographs of herself from early in their relationship. Her smile was different then, more open. She barely recognized that woman. Sarah had set up an easel in Claire's garage, among the boxes of her old life. She painted the hidden room from memory, but in her version, the walls were transparent. You could see through them. She painted herself inside, but the door was open. I think she was walking out into light. It wasn't good art, technically. The perspective was off. The colors didn't quite work, but it was hers. It was honest. One evening, an email arrived from a woman named Jennifer. She'd seen the news coverage about Daniel's ethics investigation, recognized herself in the descriptions of his subjects. "I thought I was crazy," Jennifer wrote. "He made me think I was imagining things, that I was too sensitive, too paranoid. Thank you for proving I wasn't." Sarah cried reading it. She responded immediately, and they met for coffee. Jennifer was younger, maybe 30, a landscape architect Daniel had mentored. She told Sarah about the same patterns, the gradual isolation, the erosion of confidence, the way he'd positioned himself as the only person who really understood her. "I left him," Jennifer said. "Or I thought I left him. But I've been carrying him with me for 2 years, wondering if I overreacted, if I was ungrateful, if he was right that I'd never find anyone who saw my potential the way he did." Sarah reached across the table and took her hand. "You didn't overreact. You survived." Another woman contacted her, then another. 6 women total, scattered across 3 states. They started meeting monthly. Video calls at first, then in person and when they could. They didn't call it a support group. They just met, drank wine, talked about reconstructing reality after someone had demolished it. Sarah learned their stories, how Daniel had targeted each of them during vulnerable moments, career transitions, breakups, family crises, how he documented their responses to his interventions, how he'd kept files on all of them, treating human connection like data collection. "Did he love any of us?" one woman asked during a particularly quiet evening. "Was any of it real?" Sarah thought about this for a long time. "I don't think he knows what love is," she said finally. "I think he knows fascination, control, the satisfaction of a successful design. But love requires seeing someone as a person, not a project." The Victorian house sat empty. Sarah had changed the locks, removed Daniel's belongings, but she couldn't bring herself to live there. Not yet. Maybe never. Claire suggested selling it, but Sarah hesitated. It had been her grandmother's. She remembered summers there as a child, before Daniel, when the rooms had felt safe. Instead, she rented it out to a young family, used the income to pay for therapy and teaching supplies, kept the option to reclaim it later if she ever felt ready, if it ever stopped being the place where she discovered she'd been living inside invisible walls. Sarah cut her hair, shoulder length to chin length, choppy and uneven because she did it herself with kitchen scissors in Claire's bathroom. She bought clothes in colors Daniel had said didn't suit her. Bright reds, deep purples. She felt ridiculous at first, like she was playing dress-up, but slowly, the colors started feeling like hers. She visited the museum where she used to work, stood in front of the frescoes she'd helped restore years ago. The director remembered her, offered her consulting work on a new project. Sarah said yes before she could talk herself out of it. Small reconstructions, piece by piece. One Saturday morning, Sarah woke in Claire's guest room to sunlight streaming through curtains she'd forgotten to close. She lay there for a long moment, listening to Claire moving around, downstairs to birds outside, to the ordinary sounds of a world that kept turning. She got up, made coffee, stood at the window looking out at Claire's garden, overgrown, beautiful in its wildness. A cardinal landed on the fence, its red bright against green leaves. Sarah opened the window. Cool air moved across her face. She could smell rain coming, that particular scent of wet earth and changing weather. She thought about Daniel, about the hidden room, about the woman she'd been when she didn't know she was living inside architecture designed to contain her. She thought about the woman she was becoming, uncertain, afraid sometimes, but real, finally real. The cardinal flew away. Sarah watched it disappear into the trees. She didn't need to understand everything that had happened. Didn't need to know who she'd be a year from now, 5 years from now. The not knowing used to terrify her. Daniel had known, had planned, had designed every outcome. But standing at the open window, breathing air that tasted like rain and possibility, Sarah realized the not knowing was freedom too. She didn't need walls anymore, didn't need someone to define the shape of her life. The silence was enough. The morning light was enough. The cardinal's flight was enough. She was enough. 1 year after discovery, Sarah stood in the Victorian house, her grandmother's house, her house, and looked at what she'd built. The office that had contained the hidden room was gone, completely renovated. She'd hired contractors to tear out everything, the desk, the filing cabinets, the false wall, all of it. Then she'd designed something new, a studio with 3 walls of windows, flooding the space with light. Where the false wall had stood, there was nothing but open space, air, visibility. She taught private art history lessons here now. Students came twice a week, sitting in the room, that once held secrets, learning about Renaissance restoration and Byzantine mosaics and the ways broken things could be made beautiful again. The room that had documented erasure now held creation. Sarah's divorce had been finalized 2 months ago. Daniel had disappeared quietly, moved to another state, another firm. He'd tried to sue her for defamation. The case was dismissed when she produced the documented evidence. She'd heard through Claire that he'd started dating again. Some younger woman from his new office. Sarah felt nothing about it. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even curiosity. He'd become irrelevant to her story, a chapter closed and shelved. That evening, the support group gathered in Sarah's dining room. 8 women now, the original 6 plus 2 others who'd come forward after the news coverage. They were celebrating Jennifer's engagement to someone new, someone who Jennifer described as almost boring in how straightforward he is. He says what he means, Jennifer explained, laughing. It's revolutionary. The conversation flowed, light, genuine, full of the easy rhythm of people who'd chosen each other rather than been chosen. Someone asked Sarah if she was dating. No, Sarah said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You don't want to? One of the newer women asked, surprised. I'm learning to be enough on my own, Sarah said, before I invite anyone else into my architecture. They understood. That was the gift of this group. They understood in ways no one else could. They'd all lived inside walls they couldn't see. They all knew what it meant to reconstruct reality after someone had demolished it. After everyone left, Sarah sat alone in her studio as evening light faded to blue. She thought about the hidden room, about the woman she'd been when she lived inside walls she couldn't see. About Daniel's notes. Malleable. She wasn't malleable anymore. She'd become difficult, complicated. She took up space. She said no to things, to people, to invitations that felt like obligations. She said it easily now. No. The word felt like power. Sarah walked through the house, turning on lights. She'd repainted every room, colors she'd chosen without consulting anyone. Bright yellows and deep blues Daniel would have hated. She'd hung her own artwork on the walls, even the technically imperfect pieces, the canvases that were too bold, too rough, too honest. The house looked nothing like it had. It looked like her. In the kitchen, she paused at the window, saw her reflection in the glass. 41 years old, hair shorter than Daniel had ever allowed, wearing a red shirt that made her feel alive. She barely recognized this woman, not because she was a stranger, but because she was real. Sarah returned to the studio and stood in the space where the hidden room had been. The windows reflected the fading light, turning the glass to mirrors. She could see herself repeated 3 times. Front, left, right. Visible from every angle. No hidden spaces. No false walls. She spoke aloud to her reflection, to the ghost of who she'd been. You're free now. We're free. Outside, through the new windows, she could see everything. The street, the neighbors' houses, the trees moving in evening wind, the world continuing its ordinary beautiful motion. No walls between her and it. No secrets. Just light and space, and the future she was building with her own hands. Sarah turned off the studio lights and locked the front door. She got in her car, title in her name only, and drove to Claire's house for dinner. The Victorian receded in her rearview mirror, solid and real, and no longer holding any power over her. She'd chosen to keep it, chosen to transform it, chosen to reclaim her grandmother's gift from the architecture Daniel had tried to impose on it. The house was hers now, not because she'd inherited it, but because she'd rebuilt it into something true. At a stoplight, Sarah rolled down the window. Late spring air moved across her face, warm, alive, carrying the scent of blooming things. She thought about the mechanical hum she'd heard that first day in Daniel's office, the sound that had led her to the hidden room, to the truth that had broken her and rebuilt her. She couldn't hear it anymore. The house was silent now, just wood and glass and the sounds houses make when they're lived in, honestly. The light turned green. Sarah drove forward, into the evening, into her life. The Victorian disappeared behind her. She didn't look back, not because she'd forgotten, but because she didn't need to remember to stay free. She already was. Some prisons have no bars, only blueprints drawn by hands you trusted. She learned that love without truth is architecture designed to contain you, that intimacy without honesty becomes a room with invisible walls. The hardest discovery wasn't what he'd hidden, but what he'd erased. Parts of herself surrendered so gradually she forgot they were hers. Freedom didn't arrive as triumph, but as rubble and reconstruction, as windows where walls had stood, as light flooding spaces meant to stay dark. Seeing the cage doesn't open it. Choice does. Healing isn't returning to who you were, but becoming someone new from the fragments. She built her own architecture, visible, chosen, hers. No hidden rooms, no silence mistaken for peace. Just truth, air, and the steady knowledge that she was finally completely free.